Emily Carter clutched her swollen belly as she walked down the cracked sidewalk on the outskirts of town, the cold wind biting at her thin jacket. The ache in her feet was nothing new, but tonight it felt heavier, a reminder of the weight she carried. Not just her unborn child, but the crushing uncertainty that had settled over her life. Only a few days ago, she had lost her job at the local retail store, a victim of the recent wave of closures sweeping through town. The store's sudden shutdown left her with no income, no safety net, and a mounting pile of bills that seemed impossible to pay on her own. With each step, Emily's eyes wandered over the neglected houses and empty lots, their boarded windows and peeling paint mirroring her own sense of abandonment. Her apartment lease was up at the end of the month, and with no way to cover rent, she was certain eviction was looming on the horizon. The pregnancy, once a source of joy and hope, now felt like an added burden. She was alone, with no partner or family to lean on, and the isolation gnawed at her spirit. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. As she rounded a bend, something unusual caught her eye. An old mansion, standing stoically despite years of neglect. Its grand facade was faded and worn, vines crawling up the cracked stone walls and windows coated in dust and grime. The iron gate hanging loosely on its hinges creaked softly in the wind. Emily hesitated, curiosity tugging at her heart. The mansion had always been there, a relic of a bygone era, but tonight it seemed almost alive, calling out to her with a strange familiarity. Drawn by a mixture of desperation and intrigue, Emily found herself stepping through the broken gate, the crunch of gravel beneath her boots echoing in the stillness. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten memories. She ran her hand over the cold stone pillars flanking the front door, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips. The door itself was slightly ajar, revealing a dim interior shrouded in shadows. Emily knew she shouldn't be here. This was trespassing, and the mansion belonged to someone. She was sure of it. But the ache of hunger, the cold pressing against her skin, and the uncertain future ahead left her grasping for any semblance of shelter. She pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under her weight. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of fading daylight, filtering through stained glass windows. The grand entryway was cluttered with debris, broken furniture, tattered curtains, and shattered glass. Yet hints of its former elegance lingered in the ornate moldings and faded wallpaper. Emily's heart quickened as she took in the vast space, imagining the laughter and life that must once have filled these rooms. She moved cautiously, her footsteps stirring up clouds of dust. As she wandered through the mansion, she found remnants of a life long past. A cracked porcelain vase on a side table, a tarnished silver candelabra, and faded photographs hanging crookedly on the walls. Each item whispered stories she could only guess at. Stories of families who had once called this place home. Despite the decay, Emily felt a strange comfort in the mansion's silence. It was as if the house itself understood her plight, offering a refuge from the harsh world outside. She imagined herself cleaning the layers of dirt and neglect away, restoring the mansion to its former glory, not just for herself, but for the unborn child she carried, who deserved a future brighter than the one she feared. Her fingers brushed over a dusty windowsill, and her tired eyes caught sight of a small, rusted tin box nestled in the corner. With effort, she pried it open, revealing a handful of faded letters tied with a brittle ribbon. The handwriting was elegant and delicate, the ink smudged but still legible. Emily's pulse quickened, as she realized these letters might hold secrets or stories that could offer insight, or maybe even hope. She settled on the floor, the chill seeping through her jeans, and began to read. The letters spoke of hardship and resilience, of love and loss, penned by someone who had lived in this mansion decades ago. For a moment, the weight of her own troubles lightened, replaced by a sense of connection to a stranger who had faced challenges of her own. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the broken panes. Emily knew she couldn't stay here forever. This was only a temporary sanctuary, a brief respite from the storm she faced. But in this forgotten mansion, amidst the dust and decay, she found a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. She folded the letters carefully and tucked them into her jacket pocket, a small talisman against the darkness. Tomorrow, she would return with cleaning supplies, ready to breathe life back into this place. For now, she sat quietly in the dim glow of the fading day, her hand resting on her belly, whispering promises to the baby inside, that they would find a way through the hardship together. Emily Carter, a woman burdened by loss and uncertainty, had found a fragile refuge in a forgotten mansion, and with it, the first spark of a new beginning. Weeks before Emily found herself wandering the outskirts of town, the weight of her world had shifted beneath her feet. The retail store where she'd worked for the past 3 years had announced it was closing permanently, a casualty of the economic downturn that had swept through the region like a relentless storm. The news came abruptly. No warning, no chance to prepare. One moment, she had been counting down the hours to her shift. The next, she was sitting in a cramped office, the store manager's sympathetic eyes meeting hers as he handed her the termination letter. Her job had been more than just a paycheck. It was routine, a semblance of normalcy in a life that had already thrown more than its share of challenges her way. Now, suddenly unemployed and 8 months pregnant, Emily faced a future that felt more uncertain by the day. The severance package was minimal, barely enough to cover a month's rent, and with no savings to fall back on, the bills began to pile up like an unrelenting tide. Back in her small apartment, the walls seemed to close in tighter each day. The peeling wallpaper and threadbare carpet mirrored her dwindling hope. She spent hours scanning job listings online, sending out applications and making calls, only to be met with silence or polite rejections. The world, it seemed, had little space for someone with her circumstances. A pregnant woman without a stable income and no family nearby to help. Emily's landlord had been patient at first, accepting late payments and offering gentle reminders. But when the rent remained unpaid for 2 months, the notices began arriving with increasing frequency. The final eviction notice came one chilly morning, slipped under her door with a curt demand: vacate the premises within 30 days. The words felt like a punch to the gut, a stark reminder that the precarious shelter she had called home was slipping away. Isolation pressed heavily on her. Friends she had once relied on gradually faded into the background, their own lives too busy or complicated to offer much support. The father of her child had disappeared early in the pregnancy, leaving no trace, no explanation. Alone, Emily wrestled with the fear that she might not be strong enough to carry this burden, both literally and figuratively. Each night, as she lay awake with the baby kicking softly inside her, she tried to imagine a better future. But shadows filled her mind: a cold apartment hallway, the echo of footsteps outside, the uncertainty of where she would go when the eviction deadline arrived. The pregnancy, which should have been a time of joy and anticipation, had become a source of anxiety that tightened her chest and stole her breath. Desperation began to settle in. She sold what little she owned, her old bicycle, a set of books she cherished, a worn coat, to scrape together rent for one last month. She rationed meals, skipping breakfast and often going to bed hungry to stretch what little food remained. The growing belly was a constant reminder of the life depending on her. And yet, there seemed to be no path forward. One gray afternoon, after a particularly discouraging round of job interviews that ended in polite refusals, Emily found herself wandering aimlessly through the less traveled parts of town. The streets were lined with empty storefronts and shuttered homes, the economic decline visible in every cracked window and faded sign. Her footsteps slowed as she approached the edge of the neighborhood, where a chain-link fence separated the familiar from the unknown. Beyond the fence lay a stretch of overgrown grass and tangled trees. At its center stood the mansion she had glimpsed before, a grand but neglected structure, its once majestic presence now faded and forlorn. It was a place that most people avoided, whispering tales of its abandonment and the mystery surrounding its owners. But to Emily, desperate and searching for any glimmer of hope, the mansion seemed to beckon. That day, standing before the towering gates, Emily made a choice born from necessity. She would explore the mansion, hoping to find shelter or something valuable to help her and her unborn child. The idea of breaking in felt wrong, but the alternative, facing the cold streets with nowhere to go, was far worse. As she pushed the gate open, the rusty hinges groaned in protest. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten years. The mansion loomed above her, dark and silent, its windows like empty eyes watching her every move. With trembling hands and a heart pounding with both fear and determination, Emily stepped inside, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the cavernous rooms. In the weeks that followed, memories of that first walk through the mansion mingled with the harsh realities she faced outside its walls. The eviction notice still loomed, the rent past due, and the baby's arrival growing closer with every passing day. Yet, the mansion had become a quiet sanctuary in her mind, a place where she could imagine a future not defined by loss, but by hope. Emily's story was one of quiet struggle, a woman pushed to the edge by circumstances beyond her control. But even in the darkest moments, the flicker of resilience remained, guiding her steps toward an uncertain tomorrow. The morning light filtered weakly through the grimy windows of the mansion, casting a pale glow over the dust-covered floors and faded wallpaper. Emily stood in the grand foyer, her breath visible in the chilly air, clutching a worn jacket tightly around her. The silence was profound, broken only by the subtle creaks of the old house settling. Despite the cold and decay, she felt a flicker of resolve stirring within her. Today, she decided, she would start cleaning. Her fingers traced the delicate carvings on the banister as she ascended the sweeping staircase, each step groaning beneath her feet. The mansion's grandeur was still evident, even beneath layers of dust and neglect. Ornate moldings, though chipped, hinted at a time when laughter and music had filled these halls. Emily imagined the families who had once thrived here, their lives woven into the very fabric of the house. She moved room to room, her movements slow and deliberate. The once vibrant wallpaper peeled away in long strips, revealing patches of faded plaster beneath. Heavy drapes hung in tatters, and broken chandeliers clung precariously from the ceilings. Yet, amid the ruin, Emily found traces of beauty. A delicate porcelain figurine, a tarnished brass key on a side table, a faded oil painting of a woman whose eyes seemed to follow her with quiet grace. In the parlor, Emily knelt to sweep the thick layer of dust from an ancient rug, the pattern barely discernible beneath the grime. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to the life growing inside her, a silent promise of new beginnings. This mansion, forgotten by time and people alike, felt like a mirror to her own existence, worn, overlooked, but still holding a spark of potential. Her exploration led her down a long, dim hallway, lined with doors that stood slightly ajar or firmly closed. At the far end, a heavy oak door caught her attention. Unlike the others, this one was solid and locked tight, its surface scarred by years of rust and weathering. Emily's curiosity piqued as she ran her fingers along the cold metal handle, wondering what secrets lay behind it. She glanced back toward the foyer, the vastness of the space suddenly pressing in on her. The mansion was a labyrinth of forgotten stories, and she was a reluctant intruder seeking refuge in its shadows. Yet the locked door held a promise of discovery, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Determined, Emily searched the nearby rooms for anything that might serve as a key. In a dusty writing desk, she found a small, rusted box tucked beneath scattered papers. Inside lay a handful of old keys, each one tarnished and delicate. Her heart quickened as she tried them one by one on the sturdy door. After several failed attempts, a faint click echoed through the hallway as one key turned, the lock releasing its grip. The door swung open slowly, revealing a small study bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon light, streaming through a cracked window. Shelves lined with yellowed books and faded photographs filled the room, and a heavy wooden desk sat beneath a portrait of a solemn-looking woman. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten memories. Emily stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She ran her hands over the spines of the books, their titles faded but hinting at histories and stories long buried. On the desk, she found scattered letters tied with a frayed ribbon, their cursive script delicate but legible. As she unfolded one, the words spoke of hardship and hope. Penned by a woman named Margaret, who had once called this mansion home. The discovery stirred something deep within Emily, a connection across time to someone who had faced struggles not unlike her own. The study became a sanctuary within the sanctuary, a place where past and present intertwined. As the afternoon faded into evening, Emily carefully gathered the letters and photographs, tucking them into her jacket pocket like precious treasures. Leaving the study, she paused at the threshold, casting one last glance at the mansion that had become both refuge and mystery. The house, with all its cracks and shadows, held stories waiting to be told. And Emily, against all odds, was ready to uncover them, one room at a time. As the days grew shorter and the chill of early autumn seeped into the mansion's cracked walls, Emily found herself drawn back to the small study she had unlocked weeks ago. The stack of letters and faded photographs she had discovered lay carefully spread across the wooden desk, their delicate edges whispering secrets from another era. Each morning, before the sun had fully risen, she would return to this quiet sanctuary, eager to learn more about the woman named Margaret, whose words had begun to resonate deeply within her. Margaret's diary, tucked away beneath the letters, was the most precious find of all. Bound in worn leather and yellowed with age, its pages bore the weight of decades, yet still held the inked stories of a life marked by struggle and determination. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the diary, the faint scent of old paper mingling with the musty air of the mansion. The entries revealed a woman who had lived through hardship during the Great Depression, a single mother fighting to provide for her child in a world that had little mercy for women alone. Margaret wrote of long days spent working in the nearby textile mill, the meager wages barely enough to keep food on the table. She chronicled nights of worry and loneliness, balanced by moments of fierce hope and the unyielding love she had for her son. Reading Margaret's words, Emily felt a profound connection that transcended time. The struggles of a century ago mirrored her own current battles: unemployment, isolation, and the daunting task of preparing for motherhood under uncertain circumstances. Yet, within those pages, Margaret's resilience shone like a beacon. She refused to be defeated by her circumstances, instead forging a path forward with quiet strength. One entry stood out, dated nearly 90 years ago, where Margaret described finding refuge in the mansion after a particularly harsh winter. She wrote of the solace the old house provided, its sturdy walls shielding her from the biting cold and the world's harsh judgments. The mansion had been more than a home. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could dream of a better life. Encouraged by Margaret's story, Emily felt a renewed determination take root. The mansion was no longer just a place of shelter for her and her unborn child. It was a symbol of survival and hope. She imagined herself walking the same halls, breathing life back into the forgotten rooms, and honoring the legacy of a woman who had come before her. As she turned another page, Emily's eyes caught a sketch tucked between the diary's leaves, a rough map of the mansion's grounds, marked with notes and symbols. It hinted at hidden rooms and secret compartments, suggesting that Margaret had concealed more than just memories within these walls. The possibility of uncovering something valuable or meaningful stirred Emily's curiosity and gave her a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Outside the mansion, the world continued its relentless pace. Emily still faced the harsh realities of her situation: job hunting with little success, the looming eviction notice, and the physical challenges of pregnancy. Yet, within the mansion's embrace and Margaret's words, she found moments of peace and clarity. The diary became a daily ritual, a lifeline connecting her to a past that refused to be forgotten. One afternoon, as Emily sat by the cracked window reading aloud an entry about Margaret's hopes for her son's future, a soft knock startled her. She looked up to see an elderly woman standing hesitantly in the doorway. A neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, known in the community for her kindness and sharp memory of the town's history. Mrs. Jenkins smiled gently, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "I see you've found Margaret's diary," she said, stepping inside. She was a remarkable woman. This mansion holds many stories, more than most know. Emily nodded, grateful for the company. The presence of someone who understood the mansion's significance made her feel less alone in her quest. Mrs. Jenkins offered to help piece together the history of the house and the family who had lived there, promising that the community's past might yet offer a future for Emily and her child. Together, they pored over the diary and letters, uncovering names, dates, and events that painted a vivid picture of resilience and hope. Margaret's story was not just one of personal struggle, but also a testament to the strength of women who had faced adversity with courage and grace. As twilight settled over the mansion, Emily felt a quiet resolve settle within her heart. The past and present had intertwined in this forgotten place, weaving a tapestry of survival that stretched across generations. In Margaret's words, she found not only a reflection of her own fears, but also the courage to face them. With each turn of the diary's fragile pages, Emily's hope grew. Hope that despite the hardships ahead, she and her baby could endure, that the mansion could be more than a shelter, and that the legacy of those who had come before might guide her toward a new beginning. Rumors spread quickly through the small town, carried on whispered conversations at the corner store and exchanged in hushed tones at the local diner. Word had it that the old mansion, the one Emily had claimed as her refuge, was not just a forgotten relic, but a prize eyed by a wealthy developer planning to raze it to the ground. The news hit Emily like a cold gust of wind, cutting through the fragile sense of hope she had built within the mansion's crumbling walls. The morning after hearing the rumors, Emily wrapped her growing belly in a thick sweater and stepped outside, the crisp air mingling with the scent of fallen leaves. The mansion stood stoic against the gray sky, its weathered stone walls seeming to brace for the storm ahead. She knew that holding on to this place would mean more than just cleaning and patching. It would require fighting for it. Her footsteps carried her down the narrow street to the house at the end of the block, where Mrs. Jenkins lived. The elderly woman had become a steady presence in Emily's life, a beacon of kindness amid the uncertainty. Opening the screen door, Emily found Mrs. Jenkins tending to her garden, her hands steady despite her years. "I heard the news," Emily began, her voice low. "They say the mansion's going to be torn down." Mrs. Jenkins nodded slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, that developer's been sniffing around for months. He wants to build condos, make a quick profit. Doesn't care about the history or the people who found shelter here." Emily's heart tightened. The mansion was more than just wood and stone to her. It was a symbol of survival, a fragile hope for the future. She couldn't let it be reduced to rubble. "Is there anything we can do?" Emily asked, desperation threading through her words. Mrs. Jenkins smiled faintly, eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "There's always a fight when it comes to places like this. But the community can be a powerful force if it comes together. We just have to make them see why this mansion matters." Over the next few days, Emily began reaching out to neighbors and local shopkeepers, sharing what she had learned from Margaret's diary and the mansion's history. Some listened with curiosity, others with skepticism, but a few offered support. Mrs. Jenkins helped connect Emily with a small group of residents who valued the town's heritage and were wary of unchecked development. The mansion, once a forgotten ghost on the edge of town, started to stir something in the community. Memories surfaced, stories from older residents about dances held in the grand ballroom, children playing in the overgrown gardens, and the mansion's role as a haven during difficult times. Emily gathered these stories, weaving them together with the letters and diary entries she had found, building a narrative that spoke of resilience and refuge. Yet, opposition was fierce. The developer, a man named Mr. Caldwell, was determined to acquire the property quickly. Notices appeared on the mansion's gate, warning of imminent demolition and demanding that any occupants vacate immediately. Emily found herself facing not just the uncertainty of her own future, but the threat of losing the one place where she had begun to find hope. One afternoon, as she stood outside the mansion reading the eviction notice, a car pulled up and a sharply dressed man stepped out. He introduced himself as Caldwell's attorney and handed her papers demanding immediate departure. Emily's hands trembled as she refused to sign, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. This mansion means more than just land or buildings. It's a piece of our community's soul. The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "Your sentiment won't change the law. You need to leave." Determined not to be intimidated, Emily sought help from Mrs. Jenkins and the group of neighbors who had rallied behind her. Together, they contacted local heritage organizations and city officials, presenting the documents and stories Emily had collected. The mansion's history as a refuge, its architectural significance, and the community's attachment became the foundation for a campaign to protect it. Throughout this struggle, Emily found strength in the unexpected solidarity. Volunteers arrived to help clean the mansion's grounds, neighbors brought food and supplies, and local journalists began covering the unfolding story. The mansion transformed from an abandoned eyesore to a symbol of resistance and community spirit. Yet, the battle was far from over. Tension simmered as the developer pressed forward, Legal notices piled up, and the threat of demolition loomed closer. Emily's pregnancy advanced, adding urgency and vulnerability to her fight. Nights were restless, filled with worry for her child and the home she hoped to preserve. One evening, as she sat by the dim glow of a candle in the study, Emily read aloud a passage from Margaret's diary about facing adversity with courage. The words felt like a lifeline, reminding her that she was not alone in this struggle. The mansion, with its cracked walls and faded grandeur, had become a battleground between the past and the future, between profit and preservation. For Emily, it was more than a place. It was a testament to resilience, a sanctuary worth fighting for. And with the community rallying around her, she was determined to see the fight through, no matter the cost. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she dug beneath a loose floorboard in the study, the small scrape of wood against wood echoing softly in the quiet room. The mansion had become her refuge, but now it was also a puzzle, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Weeks spent poring over Margaret's diary and the scattered letters had ignited a fierce curiosity. The sketch of the mansion's grounds, with its cryptic symbols and notes, hinted at secrets hidden just beneath the surface. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. Pulling it free, she held up a small, rusted key, its intricate design worn but unmistakably crafted for a purpose. Emily's heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Could this be the key to unlocking the locked door she had discovered earlier? The door she had been unable to open with the set of old keys she had found hidden in the desk. With renewed determination, Emily made her way to the hallway where the heavy oak door stood firmly shut. The mansion's silence wrapped around her like a shroud as she inserted the newly found key into the lock. It fit perfectly. A satisfying click echoed through the hallway as the lock released its hold, and the door creaked open to reveal a hidden study bathed in soft, dusty light filtering through a cracked window. Stepping inside, Emily's eyes widened. This room was preserved far better than the rest of the mansion, as if time itself had paused here. Rows of books lined the shelves, their spines faded but still legible. Photographs in delicate frames stood on the heavy wooden desk, capturing moments frozen in time. A woman and child, smiling despite worn clothes and modest surroundings. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten memories. Emily approached the desk and gently sifted through scattered letters tied with a brittle ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, the ink slightly smudged, but still readable. As she unfolded one, the words leapt out to her. They spoke of hope, hardship, and a quiet determination to protect those in need. The letters belonged to Margaret, the woman whose diary had become Emily's guide and companion. But these writings revealed a deeper story, one of a secret trust fund established by Margaret herself, intended to support women like her who found themselves alone and struggling. The mansion had been more than a home. It was a sanctuary, a beacon of hope for those facing hardship. Emily's fingers trembled as she pieced together the fragments. Margaret had hidden these documents here, perhaps hoping that someday someone in need would find them and carry on her legacy. The discovery filled Emily with a new sense of purpose. This was no longer just a fight to keep a roof over her head. It was a chance to honor a woman who had dared to dream of a better future for others. She carefully gathered the letters and photographs, her mind racing with possibilities. If the trust fund still existed, it could provide the support she so desperately needed. But verifying its existence and accessing it would require help, a task too complex for her to tackle alone. Later that day, Emily met with Mrs. Jenkins, the kind neighbor who had become both a friend and an ally. Sharing the discovery, Emily watched as Mrs. Jenkins's eyes shone with a mixture of surprise and hope. "This changes everything," Mrs. Jenkins whispered. Margaret wasn't just a victim of her circumstances. She was a fighter, and she left behind a legacy to help others like you. Together, they began the painstaking process of researching the trust fund. They visited the local archives and spoke with town officials, following leads buried in dusty records and old legal documents. Each step revealed more about Margaret's life and the community she had tried to uplift. But the discovery also attracted unwanted attention. News of the documents leaked quickly, reaching the ears of Mr. Caldwell's developers. The pressure on Emily mounted as the threat of eviction and demolition loomed larger than ever. Determined not to be intimidated, Emily and Mrs. Jenkins enlisted the help of Thomas Reed, a local lawyer with a reputation for fighting for the underdog. Thomas pored over the letters and legal records, his brow furrowing as he connected the dots. "There's a strong case here," he told Emily one afternoon in his cluttered office. "If this trust fund is real, and the mansion was established as a refuge for women in crisis, we can argue for its protection, not just as a historic site, but as an active social resource." Emily felt a surge of hope, but also understood the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. The mansion was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of resilience and compassion, a testament to the strength of women who had fought to create a safer place for those in need. Back at the mansion, Emily sat in the hidden study, surrounded by the relics of Margaret's life. The photographs, letters, and diaries told a story of courage and love that transcended time. In that quiet room, Emily vowed to carry that legacy forward, to protect the mansion and the dreams it held within its walls. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dusty windows, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The key in her hand was more than a simple piece of metal. It was a symbol of unlocking not just a door, but a future filled with possibility. The eviction notice was more than just a piece of paper. It was a looming deadline etched in cold ink, demanding that Emily vacate the mansion immediately. The developer's ultimatum left no room for negotiation. Tear down or leave. Clutching the official-looking document, Emily felt the weight of the threat pressed down on her like a storm cloud ready to burst. The mansion, her sanctuary, and newfound hope was at risk of being reduced to rubble within weeks. Determined not to surrender without a fight, Emily turned to the small but growing circle of neighbors who had rallied around her cause. Mrs. Jenkins was a constant source of support, her steady presence reminding Emily that she was not alone. Together, they organized meetings in the local community center, inviting residents to share their stories and concerns about the mansion's future. The room buzzed with quiet determination as people recounted memories of the mansion's past. A place where generations had found shelter, laughter, and solace. Emily spoke passionately about Margaret's legacy and the secret trust fund they had uncovered, emphasizing the mansion's significance beyond bricks and mortar. Her voice, though tired from sleepless nights and growing pregnancy, carried a fierce conviction that resonated with those gathered. Amid the community's growing support, Emily reached out to local heritage organizations and city officials, presenting the evidence she had painstakingly gathered. The letters, diaries, and photographs painted a vivid picture of the mansion's historical and social importance. They argued that the building was not just a relic of the past, but a living testament to the resilience of women who had faced hardship and found refuge within its walls. The response was cautiously optimistic. Officials agreed to delay demolition while they reviewed the mansion's status, and heritage advocates pledged to assist in the preservation effort. Emily felt a spark of hope flicker to life, knowing that the fight was far from over, but that she had allies willing to stand beside her. Legal battles loomed, however, and the developer was relentless. Notices piled up, deadlines approached, and pressure mounted. Emily found herself navigating a maze of paperwork and court hearings, her energy sapped, but her determination unshaken. Thomas Reed, the local lawyer who had taken on her case, became a vital partner, guiding her through the complexities of property law and historic preservation statutes. One afternoon, in the dim light of his cluttered office, Thomas laid out their strategy. "We need to prove that the mansion's significance goes beyond architecture, that it's a social landmark with a living legacy," he explained. "If we can show it's still serving the community's needs, we have a strong case." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was no longer just about securing shelter for her and her unborn child. It was about preserving a place that held the stories and struggles of countless others. As days turned into weeks, the mansion became a hub of activity. Volunteers arrived to clear overgrown gardens, patch broken windows, and paint faded walls. Neighbors brought supplies and shared meals, transforming the once abandoned house into a symbol of community resilience. Emily, despite her growing fatigue, worked alongside them, finding strength in their shared purpose. The developer's attempts to undermine their efforts grew more aggressive. His legal team challenged every move, and his agents appeared unannounced, photographing the mansion and questioning neighbors. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, but the community's resolve held firm. One evening, as Emily sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket against the cool air, Mrs. Jenkins joined her, carrying a thermos of tea. The two women watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the mansion's weathered facade. "You've brought life back to this place," Mrs. Jenkins said softly. "Not just to the building, but to this whole neighborhood." Emily smiled tiredly, her hand resting on her belly. "It feels like the mansion is fighting alongside me." The weeks ahead promised more challenges, but Emily's hope burned brighter than ever. The mansion, once a forgotten relic, had become a beacon of determination and unity. Through the struggle, she discovered not only the strength within herself, but the power of a community bound by shared history and common dreams. With the eviction deadline looming, Emily prepared for the battles ahead: legal, emotional, and physical. The fight to save the mansion was far from over, but she was ready to face it head-on, fueled by the memories of those who had come before and the promise of a future still to be written. The night before the town hall meeting, Emily sat alone in the dimly lit study, the soft flicker of a candle casting shadows on the worn pages of Margaret's diary. The mansion was quiet, save for the distant rustle of leaves outside and the gentle thud of her baby's movements within her. Her thoughts swirled with anticipation and anxiety. Tomorrow was the moment she had been preparing for, the chance to make the community and the council see the mansion not as a derelict building, but as a lifeline woven into the fabric of their shared history. As dawn broke, Emily dressed carefully, smoothing the creases from her modest blouse, and wrapped a scarf around her neck against the crisp morning air. Mrs. Jenkins arrived promptly, carrying a stack of documents and a warm smile that steadied Emily's nerves. Together, they made their way to the town hall, where the council chamber buzzed with quiet murmurs and the shuffling of papers. The room was filled with an array of faces: town officials, concerned citizens, and a few representatives from the developer's company, their expressions guarded and businesslike. Emily felt the weight of their scrutiny, but steeled herself. This was her moment to speak, not only for herself and her unborn child, but for the generations of women whose stories were etched into the mansion's walls. When her name was called, Emily rose, clutching her notes tightly. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion as she began to recount the history she had uncovered. The diary entries of Margaret, the letters revealing a secret trust fund to aid women in crisis, and the mansion's role as a sanctuary through decades of hardship. She spoke of the community's efforts to restore the mansion, the volunteers who had breathed life back into its rooms, and the growing support for preserving its legacy. I stand here not just as a tenant or a mother-to-be, but as a custodian of a place that has offered hope to many, she said, her eyes sweeping the chamber. This mansion is more than a building. It is a symbol of resilience, compassion, and community. To demolish it would be to erase the stories of those who came before us and to deny future generations a refuge in times of need. As Emily finished, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered among themselves. Then, the developer's representative rose, his tone measured as he argued for progress and economic growth. This property represents an opportunity for modernization, job creation, and revitalization, he said, his gaze fixed on the council members. While we acknowledge the mansion's history, we must consider the needs of the entire town and the potential benefits of new development. The room bristled with tension as council members exchanged glances. The debate was fierce but respectful, with citizens voicing their support for both preservation and progress. Emily felt her heart pound as she listened, knowing the decision would shape not only the mansion's fate, but her own future. When the council meeting adjourned for deliberation, Emily and Mrs. Jenkins stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The weight of uncertainty hung between them, but the support they had witnessed offered a glimmer of hope. Over the next several days, Emily heard whispers of the mounting pressure on the council. The developer intensified efforts to sway opinions, while community advocates organized petitions and rallies. The mansion had become a flashpoint for a larger conversation about identity, memory, and the kind of town they wanted to be. Finally, the day of the vote arrived. Emily sat among the crowd in the council chamber, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The mayor's voice rang out as the votes were tallied, each yes and no echoing through the room. When the final count was announced, a decision to grant the mansion protected status as a historic landmark and designated as a community center. The chamber erupted in applause. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as relief and joy washed over her. The victory was not just hers, but belonged to every neighbor, volunteer, and advocate who had stood by her side. The mansion's legacy was secured, its doors opening to a future where it would continue to serve as a refuge and beacon for those in need. As the crowd dispersed, Emily felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Thomas Reed, the lawyer whose guidance had been instrumental throughout the battle. "You did it," he said with a proud smile. "This place is safe because of you." Emily nodded, her gaze drifting to the mansion visible through the chamber's windows. The worn walls, the hidden study, the stories etched into every corner. They were all part of a larger tapestry, now woven with hope and community spirit. That evening, as twilight settled over the town, Emily returned to the mansion. She walked through the restored rooms, imagining the days ahead filled with laughter, support, and new beginnings. The fight had been hard, but the victory sweeter than she had dared to hope. In the quiet glow of a single candle, Emily whispered a promise to honor Margaret's legacy, to nurture the sanctuary they had saved, and to build a future where no one would have to face hardship alone. The town council chamber hummed with quiet anticipation as Emily stepped forward, her hand steady despite the fluttering in her chest. The months of struggle, late nights poring over old documents, countless meetings, and the unwavering support of the community had all led to this pivotal moment. The evidence was laid out clearly. Margaret's letters and diary entries, the discovery of the secret trust fund, and the mansion's enduring role as a sanctuary for those in need. It was more than a battle for bricks and mortar. It was a fight for legacy, dignity, and hope. Thomas Reed stood at Emily's side, his presence a steady anchor amidst the storm. When Emily began to speak, her voice carried the weight of every woman who had walked the mansion's halls before her, every neighbor who had lent their voice to the cause, and every future soul who would find refuge within its walls. "This mansion is not merely a building," she said, "but a living testament to resilience. It tells the story of women who endured hardship, who found strength in community, and who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. The trust fund established here was meant to protect and uplift those who have nowhere else to turn." As she spoke, a hush fell over the room. Council members leaned forward, their eyes reflecting the gravity of the moment. Emily presented documents meticulously compiled by Thomas, tracing ownership, historical significance, and the legal foundation for preservation. The room absorbed every word, the weight of truth settling over them. Opposing voices from the developers' representatives attempted to challenge the narrative, citing economic growth and modernization as priorities. But the community's support was palpable. Residents, advocates, and historians had gathered in the gallery, their presence a silent but powerful testament to the mansion's importance. Throughout the hearing, Emily felt the surge of hope mingled with the tension of uncertainty. The council's deliberations would determine not just the fate of the mansion, but the future of a community's identity and the preservation of a sanctuary that had saved lives across generations. After hours of testimony and debate, the council convened in closed session. Emily waited outside, pacing the hallway, her breath shallow and heart pounding. When the doors opened, the mayor stepped forward, a solemn expression on his face. "We have reviewed the evidence presented and considered the voices of our community," he began. "It is clear that this mansion holds profound historical and social significance. We hereby grant it protected status as a historic landmark and designate it as a community center, ensuring its preservation and continued service to those in need." A wave of relief and joy swept through the room as applause erupted. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she exchanged grateful glances with Thomas and Mrs. Jenkins, who stood nearby with a proud smile. The victory was more than legal. It was a triumph of hope, determination, and collective will. In the weeks that followed, restoration efforts accelerated. Grants and donations poured in, enabling the mansion to be repaired and repurposed. Emily accepted an offer to manage the restoration project, a role that provided not only stable employment, but the opportunity to honor Margaret's vision in a tangible way. The mansion transformed from a symbol of neglect to one of renewal. Its rooms echoed with the sounds of laughter and learning, as workshops and support groups for women facing hardship began to take root. The gardens, once overgrown and wild, blossomed under the care of volunteers, becoming a place of peace and reflection. Emily's life, once marked by uncertainty and fear, began to stabilize. The mansion became more than a shelter. It was a home, a community, and a beacon of resilience. As she prepared for the arrival of her baby, she felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. One afternoon, standing in the sunlit parlor surrounded by neighbors and friends, Emily reflected on the transformation. Margaret's story had ignited a movement, and the mansion's legacy had been secured not just by law, but by the hearts of those who believed in its power. The trust fund, once hidden and forgotten, now supported women like Emily, offering resources, counseling, and a path to independence. The mansion's doors remained open, a sanctuary where stories of struggle and triumph intertwined. Emily's eyes drifted to the window, where the memorial grove planted in Margaret's name swayed gently in the breeze. It was a living symbol of new beginnings and enduring strength. In that moment, Emily understood that the mansion was more than bricks and history. It was a testament to the unbreakable spirit of women, a community's resilience, and the transformative power of hope. Months had passed since the town council's decision, and the mansion had blossomed into a vibrant haven filled with warmth and purpose. Emily stood near the window of the newly restored parlor, the soft light of a late afternoon sun spilling into the room, casting a golden glow over the polished wooden floors and freshly painted walls. The air was alive with a hum of voices. Women sharing stories, children laughing, and volunteers bustling about, preparing for the next community event. Cradling her newborn son in her arms, Emily felt a profound sense of peace settle within her. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, grounding her in this moment of hope and renewal. The mansion that had once been a silent, forgotten relic was now a sanctuary, a shelter and resource center for women facing hardship, just as Margaret had envisioned nearly a century ago. The journey had been arduous. From the first hesitant steps into the dusty, cobwebbed rooms to the fierce legal battles and community rallies, Emily had weathered storms she never imagined facing alone. Yet here, surrounded by the laughter and support of the town, she found strength she hadn't known she possessed. The mansion's transformation was more than physical. Walls that once echoed with silence now resonated with the shared resilience of those who sought refuge within. Workshops on financial literacy, counseling sessions, and childcare programs filled the calendar, each designed to empower women to rebuild their lives. Emily's role as manager was not just a job, it was a mission deeply intertwined with her own story. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Emily walked through the gardens, now vibrant with blooming flowers and newly planted trees. Among them stood a memorial grove dedicated to Margaret, a living tribute to the woman whose courage and kindness had sparked a legacy that transcended time. The grove was a place of reflection and renewal, where visitors could find solace beneath the rustling leaves. Emily paused beneath the tallest tree, tracing her fingers over a small plaque engraved with Margaret's name and a simple phrase: "A refuge for those who seek hope." She closed her eyes, feeling a connection to the past and a promise to the future. As she returned inside, Emily found Mrs. Jenkins arranging refreshments in the community kitchen. Their eyes met, and a smile passed between them, a shared acknowledgement of how far they had come. "It's hard to believe this all started with a few letters and a dusty old diary," Mrs. Jenkins said softly. Emily nodded. "Margaret's story gave me the strength to keep going. And now, this place is filled with new stories, stories of courage, recovery, and hope." Later that evening, as Emily settled into a worn but comfortable chair by the fireplace, she reflected on the path that had brought her here. The mansion had been more than shelter during her darkest days. It had been a beacon, guiding her through uncertainty toward a future filled with possibility. Her thoughts drifted to the women who would come after her, those who might walk through the mansion's doors seeking refuge and support. She vowed to honor Margaret's vision by ensuring the mansion remained a place where kindness and strength flourished. Outside, the town's lights twinkled against the night sky, a constellation of hope woven into the community's fabric. Emily hugged her son close, whispering promises of safety and love. In the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the legacy of resilience and the warmth of newfound family. Emily felt the true meaning of home. The mansion, once abandoned and forgotten, stood as a testament to the enduring power of courage, community, and the unbreakable bonds forged through hardship and hope.